forgot to push a button.
Yeah, I was the same way in my first debate. Okay, so this motion is the recent U.S. tax law will be beneficial to the vast majority of taxpayers. So this is about people that, so by taxpayers, we're talking about people that pay taxes in the U.S., of course. I'm talking about income taxes. So this isn't about the poor people. They don't actually have a income tax burden. And this isn't about what may happen in the future. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. So this is about the tax law that's in effect right now. So that's going to be the motion. And my case for it is pretty simple. That it benefits people by having increasing their take-home pay. So you put more money in people's pockets, and the tax law has three main provisions that does that. One, it doubles the standard deduction from I think 12,600 to 24,000 or something like that, and 70% of people take that standard deduction. So already 70% of taxpayers are being greatly benefited by that provision. I think under the new tax law, 90%, 9 out of 10 people are going to be expected to take that standard deduction.
Now, I have a question for you
Yeah.
on that part. Now, you talked about that standard deduction, which I think is like line number, I don't know, whatever the number is, like 20 some odd. But right underneath that, there's another one, and that is the individual deduction. And the individual deduction is normally yourself, your spouse, and then all your dependents, and it's multiplied by $4,050. So, in other words, if you have 3 people in your family, right after the standard deduction and on the old tax rate was $12,900. But right below that was $4,050 for each you, your wife, and your dependents. So 3 dependents was another 12. That is the 24. So any more than 3 people, number 4, number 5, for example, if you had 5 people in your house, that's an additional $22,500 for the $4,050 times 5, plus the $12,900, which would equal $34,400, which is far more than the $24,000 worth of deduction. So what they don't quite tell you is that although they are increasing the standard deduction, they are not. They eliminated the individual deduction. I don't know if you're considering that in your argument.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, I guess those would just be applied to large families, and they did increase the child deduction. Also, that was going to be my next point.
And admittingly, that for those larger families, that extra $2,000 does offset some of the loss from those $4,050 for the larger families. So as long as they're under 16 years old, that does take care of, because they're losing quite a bit, $4,050 per kid. But if they are in that child tax credit, some of that's coming back to them. So they're not losing it all, but they have to be under 16 and less than $150,000 a year in income.
Did you say the old tax laws had an individual deduction of $4,500? You said?
Yeah, I believe
for each dependent or for each person in the household.
If you fill out if you look at the actual the tax returns, I think it's line 47. Line 47 basically is individual deduction. You multiply 4,050 by whatever's on line 6. Line 6 is you, yourself, your spouse, and then how many dependents you have, which totals however many, say 5. So you may multiply the 5 times 4,050, and that goes on line 47, which is just under 46, which is the standard deduction.
Okay.
They don't tell you that though in the the puffing of this tax plan.
I'm looking at my last year's tax return now, trying to follow you.
Look at 47.
Line 47. Okay. It says add lines 44, 45, and 46. So
go up because you have a different return. Go up a couple. You see where the standard 45. Deduction is? Where's your standard deduction?
Yeah, line 40.
Okay, what's the next line below that?
Subtract lines 40 from line 38.
Okay, then after that?
Then exemptions. If line multiply 4,000. Okay, there you go. 4,050 by the number of number on line 6D. Okay.
They eliminated that. So it only takes a couple for that. So that extra 12 grand goes right out the window when you have any more than, sure, for a family of two, it's beneficial to 24 rather than the 12, because you're only losing 12,000 or you're only losing 8,000 in terms of individual deductions. Once you get that third one, it's a wash, and after 3, you're actually losing 4,000 per dependent. And if you have older dependents, a senior citizen or someone over 16, you don't get that child tax credit. I just didn't know if you actually knew that, because they don't tell you that part.
No, I didn't know that, but I'm wondering if that is in addition to the standard deduction, or if that's just straight on top of it.
Yeah.
Or how that works with the other deductions.
The standard deduction for your, instead of itemizing, and then the individual deduction, everybody gets to take. It always have. But that individual deduction is gone in the new tax plan. They got rid of it.
Okay. Yeah, I know that. So there's a CNN calculator. I guess I can post it in the comments. And you can kind of mess with if you have deductions or kids and what your income is, and see how it will affect you. And from looking at that, I gathered that basically childless people that itemize will be hurt the most. And but yeah, I wasn't aware of that. So I figured the people with large families is probably not a huge.
If you have a family of 6, you only get the now 24,000, but you lose the 4,000 times 6.
Okay. And then well, the third thing I was going to mention, the third thing is they cut taxes across the board. So each person is probably going to have to pay less marginal tax rate. So I guess the question would be if that overshadows the larger standard deduction and then the decrease in tax rate and the increased child tax credit. So that's kind of a lot of variables to discuss now.
There's the thing that when you say benefit, the fact that somebody is going to get a deduction in their paycheck, that if you were able to get an extra $100 a month, but at the end of the year you had to pay $12,000, the benefit sort of washes out. Now, you see what I'm saying? In other words, if your employer gave you an extra $100 a month in your paycheck, but at the end of the year you actually owed an extra $12,000, there really is technically no benefit just because you got it in your paycheck. Because you're gonna have to pay
it. It sounds like you're talking about withholdings.
That's what I'm talking about.
The effect on paycheck is withholdings, right, which you can adjust to be whatever you want.
Right. But what I'm saying is
that doesn't affect your overall tax burden.
Okay, good. So let's make sure that we're talking about our net benefit, not just the fact of having a benefit from more money in a particular paycheck. Okay, it's the net less tax paid. We agree with that? I mean, it's your less.
Yeah, absolutely. My claim is most taxpayers will pay less overall taxes.
I agree. So I agree. And so the reason why I really disagree is because if you actually consider prior to the tax cut, our unemployment was at very low rates. Businesses were record profits, and in terms of record profits, and they were holding record amounts of cash. Tax cuts was considered a tax stimulus. In economics, you understand that that's how you basically, it's like a shot of adrenaline into the economy. Now, what happens when you go at full employment or when you're running already strong? Well, what happens is that extra influx, because everybody's going to get this tax break, is extra money in money supply. Well, when there's extra money supply, or when the economy is basically running at full employment, what that does is it basically creates additional demand for products. For example, now people can go out and buy big consumer gas guzzling vehicles that they couldn't buy before. Okay, so but the problem is that the automobile industry can't all of a sudden tool up and create more vehicles as quick as demand is. So what that does is it drives up the price of that car consuming thing. So because of that, the Fed gets concerned, and to slow the economy back down, to stop that inflation where it costs more money to buy the same good, interest rates go up. So what happens when interest rates go up? Prime rates go up, mortgage rates go up, consumer credit cards go up, all of that go up. So if prior to the tax cut, you could have had a car loan at 2.5%. And after the tax cut, because inflation came in, the Fed had to kick up the interest rate. You can now only get a tax cut or an interest rate on your car loan at 4.9%. The fact that you're having to pay an extra 2% or whatever it happens to be is deducted from whatever that may be tax benefit you may have received, because you're having to pay more for the cost of a vehicle or cost of your purchases. In other words, so if you have to pay more for a hamburger because of the fact that you have a tax cut, the benefit would be the net. In other words, the total net benefit. And that's the biggest problem when you actually give a stimulus on a full running economy is the inflation problem, that people end up having to pay more for the same hamburger. And so to do that, what's going to end up happening next is the Fed's going to be increasing the interest rate to slow it down, which is going to, what happens when the interest rate goes up? It'll lower the stock market. It will cause profits of businesses to go down. It will cause consumer spending to go down. It'll cause home purchases to go down. It's because that's the whole purpose of increasing the interest rate, is to slow down the economy, to stop it from revving up, to prevent inflation from kicking in. And so that's what we're going to see next. I think they're already starting to, because we're already our economy was already really running strong. It had 8 years, 9 years. And so even though everybody might see a benefit today, that benefit at the end of the year, if you have to pay more for credit card payments and more for everything else because of increased interest and more difficult to get various loans, it's technically really not much of a benefit.
It's ironic because I feel like you're opposed to taxes in this debate, and I feel like you're a little too optimistic about the upside to the economy or tax.
No, I just happen to know that what a tax stimulus, in other words, a tax cut stimulates the economy. When do you need to stimulate the economy?
I agree, it stimulates the economy, but I'm not sure it stimulates it so much that you have too much demand, not enough supply for the demand.
Yeah, it will.
It probably increase demand, but I don't know if it's going to I'm not sure it's going to have so much demand that you don't have enough cars and you got to jack up prices. Believe it or not, when you're at full employment, that's how inflation. That's the definition of inflation. Now the interest rate's been held artificially low for a very, very long time, and I think regardless of what you do with taxes, they're gonna be ticking it up.
But what does the increase in the interest rate do? Banks raise the prime rate, right, which in turn affects the mortgage rates, car loans, business loans, other consumer loans, right?
My point is that's probably going to happen regardless.
Stock market goes down,
low for so long.
Go down, consumer spending goes down, home sales go down, and borrowing goes down. That's what happens when interest rates rise.
Yeah, my point is that they've been so low for so long. I think regardless of our tax policy, they were bound to go up in the near future, is what I'm saying.
Well, but once you said our whole idea of this beginning of this debate, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. But what we do know is that when there is a stimulus in the economy, when you're at full employment, when there's extra money and businesses is already running well, they start charging more for the products because they know people can afford more because they have more in their pocket. That's the definition of inflation.
I'm skeptical of your claim here, but given that premise, the question would be: would those extra prices outweigh the extra money they have in the?
Who knows?
At the end of
I don't have that crystal ball either.
I don't either. But
now, granted, in the short term, people are going to look at this thing over the next year and think, yeah, this tax cut really benefited me. Okay, I mean, it's going to feel that way to people. But it may not feel that way when all of a sudden the stock market clicks down and the economy clicks down, and all of a sudden we have that 1.5 extra trillion dollars worth of debt, to our deficit, and we have to figure out how to now pay for the services and the various different government, Social Security and the like, and people all of a sudden have to wait till 70 in order to retire because we have to pay back that 1.5 trillion that we've just given the businesses. So, we don't know. What I'm saying is that everybody ends up paying for that. And, it's not free money when you borrow 1.5 trillion from the deficit to give it to as a tax cut. Somebody's got to pay for that at some point.
Yeah, the taxes, so spending's the real tax. So I don't think it really, so if we don't have the money, if we don't have the revenues for these spending, then the Congress or the Fed's just going to print money, or we're going to borrow money, in which case you have an inflation tax, or I like to call it the inflation tax, or you borrow the money and then you got to pay it back later. So unfortunately, the government's never been restrained by its revenues, and so I think whether you have tax cuts or you don't have tax cuts, spending is a unique problem because really we have, like I said, spending is divorced from what our revenue holds
But
us
I
to.
think the last time it was actually balanced was Clinton. Clinton
Yeah,
had a balanced budget and actually got rid of the deficit altogether. But
yeah.
once the 9/11 and we had the Iraq and all that kind of stuff, and then the bailout of the banks in 2008, yeah, the deficit exploded. But right now, with the economy working as well, this was the time to start being fiscally responsible and start paying some of that back instead of giving it as a tax cut necessarily, and and basically pushing it off and paying it in the future. So I'm not sure that we benefit if we all have to work till 70 in order to have Social Security if there's no money to pay Social Security benefits. But that's in the future too, and we can't predict that either.
I agree, but I believe that's a spending problem. Like I said, the government's going to spend regardless of its revenues, and I don't think that's a consequence of the tax cuts as much as it is a consequence of our insane spending.
Well, I guess the Democrats maybe. The Republicans, that used to be that in terms of the Republican, they were very much fiscally responsible. Where's the money going to come from? And they would want it to be actually offset by some sort of a revenue base. So they didn't. Usually it's not that they're just going to spend arbitrarily just for the heck of it. And in fact, there's a very large delegate of in the House that are very much into balanced, and fiscal responsibility. But Democrats are pretty wild at spending. I'll agree with that.
Well, they all are. We don't really have a fiscally conservative party at all.
No, not anymore. It doesn't seem like it, does it?
Even the people like Bob Corker to be like budget hawks will vote for the highest spending industry and then turn around and pretend they're fiscal conservatives.
Right. That's like this whole deal with trickle-down economics, right? Trickle-down economics doesn't make sense in terms of capital because you have to be efficient. If there's a hamburger place at one side of the mall and a hamburger place at the other side of the mall, put them both in the mall so they both have the same customers, they both have the same rent, they both have the same supplies. Everything's the same except for the fact one's on one side of the mall, one's on the other. If one of them says, "Hey, tax cut, I'm going to give an extra $1 to my employees," now the market goes down, right? They're both barely struggling, so the one decides to cut his prices, the one that didn't give the raise. He can now offer a cheaper hamburger while the other one's having to pay more for his employees. So all of a sudden he's able to offer a cheaper hamburger and stay profitable. It just doesn't work in terms of a competitive market. Besides that, it's clear to see. The Trump organization had 22,000 employees, from restaurant employees to front office to people in the pro shop to groundskeepers to maids to whatever else. And if he's making apparently worth 10 billion or whatever he says he is, you would think some of that would have trickled down to his own employees. But they actually get paid minimum wage and all below industry standards. So it's not trickling down to his employees. So probably no one other business is going to trickle down to theirs either. Just a point of view.
I actually, well, for one contention, so labor cost is only just one part of your overall cost of production. So if one company has the higher labor costs, it's not necessarily going to mean they can offer they have to have higher prices because that could be in other areas, or their workers could be more productive at that higher rate.
Well, that's why I put them in the same mall with basically drawing from the same employee pool with the same supplies, having been trucked the same amount of. Like that's why I put them both in the same mall to get rid of those variables. Because you're right. The purchasing power might be able to buy cups for cheaper prices, might be able to provide advertising for cheaper prices, all those kind of things. I try to make them as even as possible to show how if one trickles it down to their employees, how it makes them less competitive. They are at a competitive disadvantage to another one that doesn't give that raise. So the purpose of giving a raise is to retain employees, or if there aren't employees available within the particular market, to bring employees in, to get them to go to work there. So you use wages as to entice or to keep employees. You don't do it just because you want to trickle down to them, because that's simply inefficient. Besides that, what's the purpose of the corporation? Maximize profits for their shareholders. If you as a corporate shareholder realize your CEO at Home Depot wants to give every one of his employees, his lot attendants pushing those carts around and his checkers and everybody else, a $2 an hour raise, when they could actually hire people right off of the street for $2 less, that means more money or less money that's going to be given to you as a dividend after the net taxes. In other words, they're going to give you less money. You get rid of that CEO because his job was to maximize profits for you, not to make the company less efficient, to have to charge higher prices, and to be less competitive with Lowe's. So it just doesn't make sense in terms of our economy, which demands efficiency in terms of businesses.
Yeah, I think that shareholder would be a bit short-sighted. Like I said, even if you're in the same labor market, in the same mall, whatever, you can still attract better workers with higher wages in that market. And
for a shop, I was talking about the guy pushing shopping carts around now. I wasn't talking about talent. I was talking about the guy in the shopping carts.
Well, there's a lot more than talent. There's work ethic and other sorts of things.
There are certain specialties. A person who sells carpet and sells cabinets and those kind of things, of course, they have to pay to retain those people and their expertise. I was trying to basically point out that they basically bleed orange or whatever it is, and they draw in people with very little labor experience, and they start them out at very low wages, pushing shopping carts or stocking shelves. They don't need to pay higher wages for that.
Well, even with low skilled labor, there are better workers than others. They're not all the same. I mean, higher wages will still attract better workers, and it'll save you in the turnover costs. You said that you do have to pay higher wages to reduce turnover and to keep workers. That helps their bottom line. Turnover is extremely expensive.
That's a good reason to pay higher raises.
That could pay dividends in the future for shareholders.
No argument. You're right about that. If the reason is to basically retain employees so that there's less turnover because there's an extreme cost in terms of training and all that kind of stuff, then yes, that's a reason to pay more. But it's not simply a reason to pay more in order to share it with their employees or to trickle it down to them. To retain
there's not
absolutely a good reason.
It's it's naive to think that it's just like benevolent acts.
Right. I agree.
So people call this stuff PR stunts, but if it still could be better for PR, and then you have people you get a better customer base because they like the company's values.
Yeah, it might be for goodwill. You don't want to be known as the cheapest big box retailer in the world.
Yeah, so there are lots of other reasons to pay high wages that can be beneficial to their bottom line, which is what their goal was.
A good reason is because Trump gave us a tax cut. That's just not a good reason to pay higher wages. There are a lot of good reasons. It may not be a good reason. It is a reason, though. I mean, if you have extra money for certain things. Yeah, but your job as a CEO is to maximize profit for your shareholders, which means it goes into a dividend in terms of the stockholders. You're not supposed to give it back to.
Well, I have a rather unique argument for corporate tax cuts, and it's probably not appropriate for this debate, but I could care less. Well, I mean, basically, essentially, I could care less what corporations do with their money. I don't care if trickle down works or doesn't work. I think it's better with corporations than bombing kids in Syria or something. Whatever government's going to do with it, corporations, as evil as people try and make them out to be, would probably be doing better things with it. So I really don't care what they do as long as they keep it out of the sociopaths in our government's hands. Sorry, you're running for office. I probably should have worded things like that.
No, that's okay. That's okay. That's why I'm running. Because I agree.
You mentioned the drop in the stock market earlier. You're not insinuating that a tax cut would cause a stock market to drop, would you? Are you?
The tax cut won't, but the increase in interest rates will.
Okay. Yeah.
Even a threat. Because remember, the stock price, Markowitz's theory, my degree's in finance. So basically says that all information that in the stock price is all the information that's available in the marketplace. All information is reflected in that stock price. So when all of a sudden there's new information like a potential tax or a potential interest rate increase, that will then create calculations which will then change the yield, which will cause the stock of the price to actually go down. Higher interest, lower yield.
Yeah, higher interest rates will definitely hurt the stock market. Even rumors of it, like I said, I definitely agree with that. But like I said, I think that's inevitable. Higher interest rates are inevitable. They can't stay this low for this long.
They will quite some time.
That's true, but I think
as long as there's no inflation, they can stay that low. It's only when the economy starts to overheat and to slow it down to stop inflation do you have to increase interest rates.
Yeah, I don't think we're there yet. We're at what, 3% 3% maybe. Are we even at 3% growth right now? I don't even think I think we're still in 2-point-something%.
Yeah, but we're at almost full employment.
That's true, but I feel like we're still growing fairly slow.
So if we're growing and we don't have employees, what happens? Wages increase.
Yeah,
for demand, but and then people more money, inflation, buying hamburgers. I mean, it all works out the same. So my prediction will be interest rates will increase, inflation is going to increase, and at the end of the day, in a year from now, people are going to be paying higher amounts for their credit cards or for their consumer loans, and that tax cut that was able to buy them a Costco membership isn't going to do a whole lot. You know that Twitter thing on the Costco membership, right? You know what I'm talking about?
No.
Somebody had said, "Oh, I just got my new pay stub. $1.50 a week. This is enough for me to actually pay for my Costco membership." And Paul Ryan actually retweeted that, thinking she was being serious when she was actually being super sarcastic. He ended up deleting it.
That's funny.
It was funny.
So I guess your argument is ironically that growth in the economy is bad in this case. If you have low employment,
overstimulation is bad.
Overstimulation.
Growth is good, but it's controlled growth. Controlled growth so that you don't grow faster than the labor market grows, so that you don't end up causing prices to increase or inflation. So you don't want an over-revving economy because that causes inflation. And you probably don't remember what stagflation was.
Yeah.
I mean, it can get really nasty when inflation starts kicking in.
Yeah. Do you have any sources on hand for maybe economists talking about demand outpacing supply with full employment and tax cuts? So, can you put in your sources to learn more about this stuff?
Well, yeah, of course, I have a minor in economics, and so I know it because I studied it in my bachelor's degree. But you can, if you actually, I'm sure you could pretty quickly. We could Google. A very quick scan here.
If you don't have a topic, that's fine.
Well, what I'm saying is
that later.
This is what I was talking about. Because it's some sort of a foreign thing. It's actually, if you basically look at what's inflation, and you talk about there's two types of inflation. Inflation, one is where there's increase in money supply, and one is for costs. It discusses exactly that, and then what happens when the Fed increases the interest rate. That's just basic econ 101 kind of stuff.
So I've heard the argument for inflation from tax cuts, but it wasn't. It was more of an argument like, since you have like a smaller share of the available money to consumers after tax cuts, and therefore things are expensive. It didn't make sense to me at the time.
It's sort of like the old guns and butter thing in economics. It changed when there is more money. It creates people are able to buy products, right? When they have more money. If there isn't enough of supply, the supply is going. The supply is the cost of that is going to increase because the demand is increased. So prices go up because demand goes up. And so unless there are actually more vehicles, for example, my example of being made. If there's only 3, Maraudis or whatever it happens to be, right, and everybody can afford them, those particular 3 vehicles go through the roof in terms of the price. It has basic supply and demand, and because businesses can't tool up as fast as people will have it all of a sudden available in their paychecks. In other words, people can all of a sudden, if someone can all of a sudden, people look at, for example, purchasing of a home. You have to be able to have a certain debt to income ratio. So all of a sudden, if everybody can now afford a home, right, then people are all of a sudden looking for homes. And if there's only a certain number of homes for sale on the market, people start bidding those homes up, and it causes the price of the homes to go up because everybody's now is able to afford higher prices because interest rates are low and because they have more disposable income. And so it causes, prices of homes to go up. That's your standard, supply and demand.
Yeah, that makes sense, except for the part that I don't know. I've just never seen a shortage of like cars on a car lot. I don't think we're in danger of like there's no cars to buy, so I got to bid up these prices. I mean, the
Well, yeah,
car lots are always full when I see them.
but that was an example. But you could put it, I don't know, getting a solar put on your roof, or who knows what it happens to be, because everybody can now afford it. There's only a certain number of contractors, so they can start charging more money in order to install solar. I mean, you could do it with any industry when there's a larger demand for the product, and there's only a few people doing the work. They can command a higher price.
That's true, but this tax cut was primarily a corporate tax cut. The individual tax cuts was kind of just a cherry on top. The main purpose was cutting corporate taxes. And when the corporations have all this extra money, they can meet this demand fairly easy, I would imagine. With all this extra money, they can hire extra workers and be more productive and fill this demand because they actually had a bigger tax cut than individuals.
When you talked about your corporation, you didn't really care. That's what I thought your argument was going to be, which is sort of my argument when it comes to corporate tax cuts too. And that is, look at Home Depot. Home Depot makes about $79, $88 billion for the year. Net before taxes, 12 billion. Right? Then they paid 4 billion in taxes, brings it down to 7. They split that between 60% dividends and then a stock buyback. But what 60% dividends to another billion people? That billion people are getting a 60% dividend. So really, who's really getting the money from this corporation? Stockholders. It might be, some might be, industrial investors. Some might be for, various different, IRAs and or retirement accounts. But the bottom line is that it is still going out to a billion investors. They have a billion in stock out there or something like that. I don't know how many in stock, but they've got a lot of stock out there. So the bottom line is that it's not like somebody at the top putting all that there in pocket. They spread it out to all of it through dividends to all of the stockholders, and there are a lot of them with a big publicly held corporation. So it's not like the corporation's getting rich. The corporation isn't anything. The corporation is just something to distribute that money to a whole bunch of people. So in that case, people benefit from your premise makes a little more sense, because people, in fact, recent tax law becomes beneficial to a vast majority of taxpayers, because a lot of those receive, whether it's the retirement or dividends or anything else, the benefits of these publicly held corporations in terms of dividends or increased retirement accounts or more solvent retirement accounts. And in that sense, because it's not like a privately held corporation where one person's putting in their pocket like Trump, if you're talking about big publicly held ones. So in that case, your premise is more sound.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few ways people can benefit from tax cuts. They can benefit directly with a bigger paychecks, or they can benefit by jobs and bonuses and raises. Which you said it's a bad reason, but there are companies like Starbucks, Walmart. There are several companies that are giving bonuses and paychecks because this paycheck, and not to mention new jobs like Toyota and Chrysler.
Yeah, but that's really not for the cut as much as it is for the press.
Oh yeah, I mean, whatever works. I don't care what the reason is.
Right.
But you do have that, and then dividend. I mean, if you just count shareholders as they're benefiting too as well. But your premise of the downside here, which would be inflation, would be only if these corporations can't fulfill demand, which I see no reason why they would not be able to fulfill the extra demand. I guess is the biggest problem I see in your argument is I feel like they will be able to fulfill this demand. There's no reason why they wouldn't be able to.
Hey, somebody made a comment on the thought of the hamburger restaurant analogy. If one business gives a raise and the other cuts prices, and if the business that gives the raise goes out of business because of it, then the workers that got a raise didn't really get a raise. They lost their jobs. Yeah, that's true. Point is that they were less competitive. But point is that the trickle down or the giving them a raise made that business less competitive, which caused them to go out of business. I mean, that was the result.
Yeah, I don't think that's a realistic scenario, though. I think raising wages, for all the reasons I said earlier, could make them more competitive with less cost savings and less turnovers and better workers.
Not in the real world. If you are able to draw, for example, entry-level employees for minimum wage, and you are paying more than minimum wage or more than whatever the market bears, then nobody wants to intentionally increase costs of their products so that they have to increase the price of the product. It
wouldn't necessarily increase costs, though, is what I'm saying. People that have low skill, they spend a ton of money in turnover. So minimum wage workers, they spend a ton of money on turnover, and that would save a ton of money.
Different issue.
It could very well pay for itself.
Well, if you're giving a raise or because to avoid turnover, that's a good business sound decision to do it. I'm talking about giving a raise because Trump gave you a tax cut.
But it doesn't matter what the motivation is. Higher wages reduces turnover, and it saves costs.
Yeah, but if there are two businesses that are basically in the same competitive market. And one of them can
bleeding a ton of money on turnover.
One of them can have employment that stays with them because they're high school workers or who knows what, or college workers for X amount of dollars. And the other one pays $1 more per hour just because. That's less competitive. Yes, it may be that by paying an extra $11, they retain. This one would probably have to pay $11 to retain. That's the competitive market. I'm not talking about a competitive market that pays more to retain their workers. What I'm talking about is simply giving an extra amount simply because you believe in this trickle down and sharing, because that just makes it basically, remember, employees are a cost. If you could automate so that you don't have any employees that don't call in sick and that, automatic checkers or automatic cashiers, the teller machines, they don't call in sick. They work 24 hours a day, no benefits, right? So they decrease the cost of the overall cost to the business because it decreased the cost of labor. Labor is a cost. And anytime to maximize profit, there's only two things you can do to maximize profit: increase sales or decrease costs. And one way to decrease costs is to automate, but you never want to increase employees' wages unless you need to retain employees or because of image, or there's a lot of reasons to do it. But the one reason not to do it is simply because you got a tax cut. This just isn't a good reason.
Well, I'm saying the reason doesn't matter. If you have high wages, you will have less turnover, and turnover is very expensive. So rising wages can save you money and make the company more competitive. Then the company has bleeding workers, bleeding a bunch of cash and turnover costs. So that's the problem with that argument.
It's just not in the capital market because you have to be competitive to survive. The whole idea of supply and demand. If a person tries to make the best product for the cheapest price, and a person that's not competitive ends up going out of business because someone else is able to be more efficient, and it therefore has either a product that has better quality or a product for a cheaper price. That's the reason why people go to China is to have lower cost of labor, and so that's the whole idea is to produce the cheapest for the cheapest price. So you don't just add a cost by increasing your wages just for the shits and giggles of it.
Yeah, of course. I'm not saying that, but people like Walmart, people like Starbucks, they're not going out of business. They're raising wages.
Walmart already has sort of a reputation of being sort of a real, low entryway, a minimum wage entry level type, and so they sort of increase their image by saying we're going to start people at $1 more an hour. So they probably get a little bit of benefit. My son works for Walmart, so he actually does in Nebraska.
Did he get a raise?
I won't say Nebraska, at the headquarters. He does their statistics. Oh. He actually, runs their numbers for them, and so no, he gets bonuses. He didn't get a raise.
Well,
I'm not talking about Walmart here.
Bigger bonus. Hopefully get a bigger bonus from this. But regardless if it's a PR stunt or whatever, it can still be a consequence of tax cuts and be a PR stunt, in which case people are benefiting from it.
Yeah. Well, all right. It was fun debating you. We only have a couple minutes left, right?
Yeah, 6 minutes. So I feel like we got a little off the beaten path. But 90% of people are taking that standard deduction next year. So, I mean, that's a huge deduction. And so you'd have to have a lot of inflation to make up for the just doubling of the deduction.
You have to subtract the individual itemized exemption of the $4,050 per person.
Only for big families. In the U.S. we don't have huge.
A family of three washes it.
The average family is what, 2.1, 2.3.
Two people, 8,000. 8 of the 12 additional is gone with two people. Now you're only 4,000 more. So that huge deduction became 4,000. I mean, you lost 8 for husband and wife. 8 of the 12. I mean, it went from 12 to 24. 8 of the 12 you lose by husband and wife. That's only 4 now. So why don't they say we're going to raise the standard deduction by $4,000 because we're going to get rid of the individual deduction for husband and wife? Because that's technically what they did.
Did they completely
eliminated it? Yep.
So zero,
gone, disappeared.
I'm going to have to check that after this debate.
They don't want to tell you that little secret part. It doesn't sound as good when you actually think that if there's a family of 3, it's a wash, and a family of 5, it's going to cost you $8,000 in exemptions.
Well, that doesn't sound right because I'm a family of 4 here, and I'm going to save a lot in taxes. So I don't know. I'm going to have to check those numbers afterwards. But I know I'm getting a tax cut, and I'm pretty happy about it. So I might be a little biased on this.
You're going to lose that $4,050.
Actually, when I have my wife at home, I'm not going to pay a penny in income tax, so that's going to make me very happy.
So what's in the new GOP final tax plan? I just Googled it, and it talks about, of course, the doubling of the 12, and then it goes on and says for individual filers, blah, blah, blah. Nearly doubles the standard deduction, but then the next thing says eliminates the personal exemption. Today, you're allowed to claim $450 personal exemption for yourself, your spouse, each your dependents. During doing so, lowers your taxable income and thus your tax burden. The GOP tax plan eliminates that option. So families with 3 or more kids, that will mute, if not negate, any tax benefit that might result from any other provisions in the bill.
Okay. So even granting that premise, you still have a cut in your tax rate. And and you still have an increase in the child tax credit on top. And the child tax credit's huge. That's way more important than a deduction.
If you qualify.
Yeah, I mean, if you have kids.
Well, yeah, you have to have kids.
And I think the high income earners are only limited to 1 kid or something.
Well, yeah, you have to.
If you have kids, you qualify.
For your jointly, I think of under 100,000.
No, I don't know about that, but I'm not talking about the earned income tax credit. I'm just talking about child
tax credit, $2,000 per kid. It's only for income under a certain amount. I don't know what that threshold is. It might be 200,000 for all I know. It may have increased that.
But so that's still like 95% of people, of income earners.
If you have kids. I mean, I have kids.
I don't know what the technical definition of vast majority, but I figured like 80+% would be considered vast majority. And
thing is,
I still think that the small families under $100,000 would still represent 80+% of the population, and those are the people that are benefiting.
You work for 40 years, and 16 of those years you have a kid that qualifies. But the other 35 or 25 years, you don't have any qualifying kids. There's only a few years of you. They actually are between 0 and 16. Mine are older now.
16 years.
It was nice when I had them, but they're all gone. And they grow up fast too.
Well, regardless, you got a lower tax rate
at that time.
And if they're gone, then that individual exemption doesn't hurt you as bad. So
that's true. For a husband and wife or a retired person that gets 24, and they only were able to deduct for the individual 8. They're benefiting by 4 extra thousand in exemptions. So senior citizen does benefit.
Well, there you go. Thanks for making my case. Case closed.
Hey, have a good one. It was fun.
Yeah, you too.
Take care.